Hashem, we're up to chapter 2 of the book of Ruth, verse 9. And Boaz has just said to Ruth, I don't want you to go worrying about anything else. I want you to gather the food here. Don't go to a different field. And I want you to be with my young women, my maidens. You should work in the fields with them. He says, your eyes should be in the field that you are harvesting, and you should follow after that. I commanded the young boys not to touch you. And when you're thirsty, and when you're thirsty, you should go to the utensils and drink from where the boys have drawn the water. Rashi says, if you get thirsty, don't be embarrassed to go and drink water from the utensils. You see, where else do we see this offer of water? Who else offered water? Because at the end of the book of Ruth, what does it say at the end of the book of Ruth? It says that all the people said, let Ruth be blessed like the house of Rachel and Leah. She was like a matriarch. But the interesting thing was that she most resembles here, Boaz is resembling Rebecca, who offers the water. And here Boaz is also offering the water to Ruth. So it's like one of the matriarchs. But in doing so, really, she is the one who becomes like one of the matriarchs. She becomes like Rachel and like Leah.
Doesn't David also ask his men to get water from the well in Bethlehem, which would be the same well that we're mentioning now?
Let's pull it up. David asks the men to go.
It's in the end of Shmuel Bet, right?
We have to go look it up. But that's different. He doesn't give them the water. He says, go there and get the water.
Yeah, I'm just saying it's the same exact well that Boaz's men would have.
No, but there could have been a well in Boaz's field.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
We don't know it's the same field. He came from Beit Lechem, so maybe he wasn't still in Beit Lechem. I don't know how many wells there were around there. When I saw Moshe's well in Midian. It was a pretty big well. Okay. She falls on her face. She bows down to the ground. And she says to Boaz, Madua motzati chen beinecha lahakireni va'anochi nochriya. Everybody has a favorite verse in the book of Ruth. This is my favorite verse because she falls on her face and she says, why did I find favor in your eyes to recognize me? I am a nochriya. I'm a foreigner. I'm a nobody. But the reason why I like this verse is almost everybody, most people have the opposite approach. Where Rabbi Yosef would say in Hebrew, Magia lahem, that they feel like this is what Magia li, that I deserve it. Everybody says, look, I had such a hard life. I deserve somebody doing a little bit of favor for me. And who had a harder life than Ruth? Her husband died. She was left all alone. She's now a beggar. So this guy gives her a little bit of food. And all she says is, I'm a nobody. Why am I deserving of this? She doesn't look at everything she did for Naami. She doesn't look at the extreme risks she took in traveling along. No, all she says is, why are you doing this for me? I'm just a foreigner. I'm a nobody. And why did I find favor in your eyes to recognize me? This shows the greatness of Ruth is that she is her humility and her gratitude. Her gratitude. So that's the greatness of Ruth. Vayam Boaz. So Boaz responded. There's no Rashi there. Vayam Boaz Vayomer La. Boaz responds and he says to her, Uged hu gadli, ki ko asher asiti et chamotech, acharei mot ishech, vatazvi avich v'imech, ve'eretz moatech, v'tachi el am asher lo yadat t'mol shalom. He said, the reason is because it was told to me. Boaz responds, and he said to her, who gave who godly. It was told to me. Everything that you did with your mother-in-law after your husband died, and you abandoned your father and your mother and your birthplace, and you went to the land to a people who you did not know yesterday or the day before. So this is the concept here. This is the concept here. Hold on. And he says, Yishalem Hashem Po'alech Utihi Maskurtech Shlema. God, how are you doing? Come on in, Aryeh. We're studying the book of Ruth. Can you bring it? Beautiful. We're in chapter 2, verse 12. Yishalem Hashem. How are you doing? Are you good? Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem. He says, so Boaz says to Ruth, Yishalem Hashem Palech. God should pay you for your work. Utihi maskurtech shlema. You will be, let your payment be complete. You came to seek refuge under his wings. So this is another reason why people theorize that we read the book of Ruth on Shavuot, because we came under Tachas Kanfei Shlina, under the wings of the divine providence. And here it says that you have also come, that Boaz says to Ruth, you came under the refuge of God of Israel. Vatomer, and so now Ruth responds to Boaz. So Ruth responds to Boaz, Vatomer, Emtzachem beinecha Adoni, ki nichamtani, v'chidibarta alev shefchatech. She said, I want to find favor in your eyes, my master, because you've comforted me and you spoke to the heart of your maid. And I will not be with you. This is a opaque verse. What is she saying here? I will not be for you like one of your maidservants. So Rashi says it means, I'm not even as worthy as one of your maids, because I'm not even from the Jewish people. I'm from the Moabites. So I'm nowhere near your, I'm the lowest person in the society, and you're giving me so much honor and respect. Again, this goes back to the theme of Ruth being the most humble person of all, the most grateful person of all, person who does not expect anything in life, person with zero expectation. Vayomer la Boaz le'eta ochel, and Boaz says to her when it came time to eat, Goshi halom, approach here, come over here. Va'achalt min alechem, you shall eat from the bread. V'tavalt pitech bachometz, and you shall dip your bread in the vinegar. That's what they used to do. Like today we call it hummus or tahini, then they call it vinegar. So he says, come close, eat from the bread, dip your bread in the vinegar. Oh, you see, by the way, I just want to point out, Rabbi Yosef, it says, V'achalt min alechem, v'tavalt pitech bachometz, and dip your bread in vinegar. So what's the difference between lechem and pat. So really, in biblical Hebrew, lechem does not mean bread. Lechem means food. Pat is bread. Lechem means food. They called it bread because it was a dipping society, and just like bread was dipped, all the food was dipped. But lechem really means food, not necessarily bread. That I learned when I took biblical Hebrew in Yeshiva University with Professor Richard Steiner, a great teacher. He says, okay, you dip your bread in the vinegar, and you should sit next to the harvesters. And he handed her the parched grain, and she ate it, and she was satiated, and she had left over. That's how much he gave her. Let's look at what Rashi says. You should dip your piteach bachometz, miktan shachometz yafeh. We see from here that the vinegar is right. Well, Sheriff, meaning to say, if you're too hot, you're supposed to dip your food in the vinegar. Oh, Eliezer. It cools you down. Vinegar cools you down. That's what the teaching is. Okay. Then it states, Rashi says, "Vayitzbatla Kelly," and he handed it to her. There's no word similar to this word vayitzbat. This is unusual word, nothing similar to it. How are you guys doing? Grab a chumash. We're studying the book of Ruth. We're studying the book of Ruth. Here's a chumash, Rafi. All right. Yeah. See, so Vatakam Lulakate. We're in chapter 2 of the book of Ruth, verse 15. How you doing, Sam? How'd the market do today? It was all right. It's all right. That's what we say. It's all right. It's all right. It's all right. Jeff, if you need business advice, Sam is in wealth management. Yeah, you ever need anyone, you just talk to Sam. He's an intern now, but give him time and he'll be the top guy. But let me ask you a Geshmak question, Sam. Why would somebody use a person when they could just use a computer to give her financial advice? Yeah. People have no idea what to do. Is that true? You can make the decisions yourself. Well, at the end of the day, somebody needs to tell the computer what to do. Yeah. So with other human beings, there's the emotional aspect of building a relationship. So it's a relationship. Okay, well, you're going to do very well because you have a face that people could trust. No. He's not going to lose anybody's money. He's not losing anybody's money. All right. So, hello, Barbara. So it says in chapter 2, verse 15, Ruth got up to collect the food. Vayitzav Boaz es ne'arav lemar. Boaz commands the youth, saying, Gam bein hamarim to'aket v'lo tachalimuha. Let her also collect amongst the stalks, meaning to say, legally, she was not allowed to go and collect from between the gleanings. She could only take the forgotten ones, or from between the sheaves. She can only take the gleanings, the corner, or the forgotten stalks. But he told the boys there, let her collect even from the gleanings. He was being extra generous. because the poor are only entitled. She couldn't collect from the stalks.
Yeah.
The poor are only entitled to collect the forgotten bundles, the gleanings, meaning the stuff that was too young to be picked, or the corner of the field. But he allowed her to go from between the stalks, which was an extra, which was part of the things we see in this book is, and this is the book about the covenant of the people, is we see that people go beyond the letter of the law. Boaz was being extra generous with her. He didn't have to. Ruth was being extra generous with Naami. She didn't have to go with her mother-in-law. She went. Boaz didn't have to give her this. And he did. The guy, I don't know if, Barbara, did you ever read the book that Leon Cass wrote about the book of Ruth? A very beautiful book. It's beautiful. V'gam shol tashulu la. The word shol, forget, meaning to say, make it like you're forgetting from amongst the heaps. V'azavtem v'litav lo tigaruba, meaning to say, intentionally forget something. There's a mitzvah in the Torah. There's one mitzvah that we can't do unless we forget. There's only one mitzvah you could do by forgetting, only if you forget. And that's the mitzvah of if you forget your bundles, you have to leave it for the poor. Up to 2 bundles, you have to leave. 3, you don't leave. So Boaz here said, intentionally forget the bundles and leave them for her and don't get upset. Meaning let her collect the bundles. That's what Rashi says. Tvatim or Amaram, the minor stalks. Vatilakot, so verse 17. Vatilakot pasadeh ada erev. She gathered in the field until the evening. Vatachpot et asher liketa, and she beat out what she had gathered. Vayike ifasorim. This is a large amount. She had an ephah of barley. That's a very, very large amount. Basically, how much is that? Right. An ephah is 10 omers, and an omer is what one person can eat in one day. So she collected in that one day food for 10 days. And this is significant. Vatisa vatavoa ir. So she picked up her bundle and she came to the city. Vatera chamota tasher liketa. So her mother-in-law, what's her mother-in-law's name again? Who remembers? Who remembers her mother-in-law, Colby? What? What'd you say, Rafi? You said it, Rafi? Naami? So her mother-in-law saw her, what she collected. Vatotse vatitein la et asher otira misiva. And her mother-in-law went out and she gave to her mother-in-law that which she had left over from her from after she ate. Vatomer la chamota. And her mother-in-law said to her, Eifo likatata, because the mother-in-law is, of course, very excited that she came back with such a large amount, unusually large. So when I first came to Oev Shalom, I gave a shiur on Shavuot night entitled Monster-in-Law. I think there was a movie that came out then called Monster-in-Law. And it was about whether or not Naami was a little bit manipulative of this situation. So she said, her mother-in-law said, where'd you gather today? Va'ana asit, where did you do this? Yihima kirech baruch. Let the owner of this field, Rashi says, be blessed, because he obviously gave you so much from the field. Vatagelu chamota et asher asta imo. And she told her mother-in-law that which she had done with her. Vatomer shema ish asher astiti imo ayom Boaz. And she said, the name of the man who did this with me today was Boaz. Now we have to remember, what do we know about Boaz? What do we say the rabbi said about Boaz? Now, what did he just do that day? He buried his wife that day, which means he was a free agent. That's what Naomi's thinking. That's what Naomi's thinking. Sorry to be so crass. What? The Talmud says you're supposed to wait 3 holidays. Well, there's a dispute whether it's 1 holiday or 3 holidays. Has never given birth, then you could do right away. then you can marry right away because she or to fulfill the mitzvah of puravu. So if the woman has never given birth, and also in this case, there was the matter was the redemption of Elimelech because he didn't have an heir. Also, the rabbis say that Boaz did not survive the wedding night. It was just the wedding night with Ruth, and that was it for him. Yeah, that's what the Midrash says. It was one night. He only lasted one night, but it was enough. It was enough to make her pregnant. Vatomer Naami Lakalatas, and Naami said to her daughter-in-law, Baruch Hu Hashem, blessed be God, Ashalo Azav Chasto et Tachayim Tametim. Blessed be God who has not abandoned his kindness with the living and the dead. And so now all of a sudden, Naami is planting the seed. He says he has not abandoned his kindness with the living and with the dead, that he nourishes and sustains the living, and he's caring for the needs of the dead. And Naami says, this man Boaz is our relative, but more than that, he's our redeemer. It's not like you have a relative. Let's say you find out, I have a third cousin who lives in Baltimore. Maybe he'll help me out a little. No, the relative's responsibility was to be the redeemer. If you were a widow, it was the relative's responsibility to marry you. And nobody was marrying Naami. Why was nobody marrying Naami? Presumably, well, it could be that it was bad luck, but also it wouldn't help. Presumably, she was, as she said, she was too old. She was too old to have children. She said, even if I give birth today, but she wasn't going to have. Seemingly she was too old, and yeah,
Yibum would only be for Machlon and Kilyon, not for Elimelech, because he had two sons. So Naomi would not.
No, but his two sons were dead. His two
yeah,
sons
but I'm saying, but she wouldn't have to practice the Yibum for herself.
Yes, because her sons were dead, she had to do it. I believe that's what the Gemara says. That Yibum, if you have a child, Rahman al-Tzalim, and the child's no longer, you still have to do the Yibum. Yibum would be if you never had a child, but also Machon and Chalion need to do it. Boaz was not the direct brother. He was the nephew, according to the rabbis in the Gemara. So he wasn't technically required. So this was not technical levirate marriage. It was symbolic that the relatives had to take care of the one who was not there. But you see from Ruth's reaction that she was not so keen about connecting with Boaz right away, about marrying. Because what does Ruth say? Look at these next two verses. Ruth says the following. Ruth the Moabite says, Gam ki amar Elai imanarim asher li tidbakun adam kilu et kol katsir asher li. Ruth says, he said to me, stay with the young men until you finish the harvest. Vatomer Naami al Ruth kalata tov biti, good my daughter, ki teitzei im narotav, go out with his young women. Wo yifku bach b'sadeh acher, and do not go to another field. You notice what's going on here? What did Ruth say versus what did Naami say? Does anybody see a difference? What did Ruth say versus what did Naami say? Let's go back to this dialogue because you'll be very clear. Remember what Boaz said. Boaz said, stay here and harvest with my young women. He says that. Where did he say that? He said that in verse 8, chapter 2, verse 8. He says, don't go to another field. Stay and harvest with my young women, with your peers. Ruth comes back and says to Naami, guess what? I have all this food. She says, where'd you go? She said, I went to the field of Boaz. And then she said, Boaz is our relative. And meaning to say, he's our redeemer, meaning he's supposed to marry you. He's our redeemer. And then Ruth says what? She says, no, he's not interested in me. He told me to hang out with his young men. Ki amar Elai imanarim. Hang out with the young men. That's who you should be with. And what does Naami respond? She says, good, my daughter, go out with his young women. Teitzi im narosav.
So I read this as the subtext here is Naami is saying, I want you to marry him. You marry rich, we'll be taken care of for life or whatever. We'll redeem my husband and my children. And it'll be very beneficial to the family if you marry him. And Ruth is reluctant. She said, no, he told me to hang out with the young men, meaning maybe I'm destined for one of them and not for him. And Ruth says, no, you don't go. And Naami says, no, you don't go anywhere near those young men. I want you to hang out with the young women and marry the young women. You follow this, Sam? So that's why I said this is Naami is the manipulative mother-in-law. Mother-in-laws have it tough, but she's the manipulative mother-in-law who's trying to arrange her daughter-in-law to marry Boaz, whereas the daughter-in-law seems to be hesitant, and Boaz has not shown any interest aside from being very charitable towards her. You follow that, Sam? Sure.
I think so.
It's in the bottom line is it was in Naomi's interest to marry Ruth off to Boaz, but it was not necessarily in Ruth's interest. Boaz was an old guy. She didn't want to, and she was a young woman. Boaz was a different generation. He had already had 60 children by this point, according to the Talmud. Why would she want to be with a guy like that? And the Talmud warns us that you're not supposed to marry a young person to an old person. It's not appropriate. I mean, we're not talking about a decade apart. We're talking about decades apart. You know,
Is it there, or it's just like not like the right thing?
Talmud says it's not appropriate. Like Bill Belichick and his girlfriend. I don't know what her name is,
Yeah.
but it's so sad. You know, it's like this is a guy. I look at that situation. This is a guy who's been in control his whole life, and I feel like he's not of a sound mind anymore. Seriously. I think it's sad when you see people not of their sound mind. And everybody that makes fun of them, but there's no way if he was 20 years younger, he'd be making these decisions. He wouldn't. Yeah,
Maybe not. Maybe he's not.
I don't know. I think we've given him enough airtime. But anyway, let me just